This is the most impossible marriage in the Harry Potter universe. A man who literally cannot love, bound to a woman whose entire identity is built on loving him, and somehow against everything we know about Voldemort, about Tom Riddle who became Lord Voldemort, and everything Dumbledore ever told us. We're going to explore what happens if Lord Voldemort actually married Bellatrix Lestrange, and they had a child together. Let me be crystal clear from the start. Yes, cursed child introduced Delphine, but we are not touching that play. It doesn't exist in this conversation. What we're doing is taking everything from the 7 books, everything Rowling said in interviews, the canon characterizations, the timeline, and building this hypothetical from the ground up. Because the implications of this scenario go far past one plot line and reshape the whole Harry Potter saga. So, let's start with the elephant in the room, Voldemort and love. Dumbledore told us repeatedly that love is Voldemort's greatest weakness, and the scary part is that it was never a choice. The man simply doesn't understand what love is, and the roots of that go all the way back to his mother, Merope Gaunt, who used a love potion to conceive him, meaning Tom Riddle was never capable of feeling love from the moment he was born. When fans once asked Rowling directly whether Voldemort ever loved anyone, her answer was a flat no. No surprise there. He loved only power and himself. He valued people he could use to advance his own objectives. He stated plainly, on more than one occasion, that Voldemort has never cared for or loved anyone. So, right away, this marriage isn't a love story. It can't be, and that's actually what makes it so fascinating. Because on the other side of this equation, you have Bellatrix Black. Born in 1951, eldest daughter of the noble House of Black, sorted into Slytherin, and from the moment she entered Voldemort's orbit, she was gone, absolutely irrevocably consumed by devotion to this man. She was already married to Rodolphus Lestrange, a pure-blood Death Eater, a man her parents chose for her in an arranged marriage, and she couldn't have cared less about him. The marriage was a formality, a pure-blood obligation. Rodolphus has been described as her loyal husband despite her constantly and openly being devoted to another man. He didn't care about the marriage either. It was an alliance, nothing more. Bellatrix once proclaimed that any sons she bore her husband, she would gladly sacrifice in the service of the Dark Lord. Think about that. She didn't even have children, and she was already offering up hypothetical ones to Voldemort like sacrificial lambs. Glad she wasn't my mother. So, what would it actually take for Voldemort to marry Bellatrix? And once we answer that, a bigger question is waiting. How would this marriage change the rest of the Harry Potter saga, book by book? Love is off the table, we've established that, and companionship means nothing to a man who sees people as tools. But Voldemort is nothing if not strategic, and there are scenarios where a formal union with Bellatrix Black makes cold, calculated sense. The Black family is one of the most powerful pure-blood dynasties in Wizarding Britain. Marrying into it consolidates power. It sends a message to the Death Eaters. It creates a political structure around his movement. Voldemort was always building something larger than himself, even if he intended to sit at the top of it forever. There's also the small matter of what a Death Eater wedding would even look like. Pureblood weddings are formal dynastic affairs. Think Bill and Fleur ceremony at the Burrow, minus the warmth and plus a lot more skull imagery. The Black family would have treated it as the social event of the decade, while Berga Black, the woman whose portrait still screams at visitors in Grimmauld Place, would finally have something to be proud of. A niece married to the most powerful dark wizard alive. The family motto is toujours pur. That's always pure. And on paper, this match delivers exactly that. Well, on Bellatrix's side anyway. Voldemort's own half-blood parentage would need to stay buried deeper than the Chamber of Secrets, because the moment the Blacks learn their new son-in-law is the child of a muggle from Little Hangleton, the fairy tale collapses. And then there's Rodolphus. Wizarding Britain clearly has some form of marital law, and Bellatrix is already legally attached. Voldemort's solution would be brutally simple. Either steps aside voluntarily, or he becomes a cautionary tale at the next Death Eater meeting. Given his track record of tolerating his wife's obsession, stepping aside quietly seems like the survival play. Now here's where the child comes in. And here's where the fan community has had the most heated debates. Because there's a massive contradiction at the core of this idea. Voldemort believed he was immortal. He had his Horcruxes. He was convinced he had conquered death from the moment he created his first soul fragment. So, why would an immortal being need an heir? He wouldn't, and fans on Reddit have pointed this out relentlessly. The notion of an heir would actually offend Voldemort because it implies he could die. So, if a child exists in this scenario, wanting a successor had nothing to do with it. It's either an accident, which seems unlikely given wizards have magical means of prevention, or it serves another purpose entirely. One fan theory that's genuinely chilling suggests Voldemort would have intended the child to become a Horcrux, a living vessel like Nagini, but one capable of casting magic, a servant bound to him by blood and dark magic simultaneously. That is exactly the kind of thing Voldemort would do, and it reframes the entire concept of this child from heir to instrument. But let's set aside the why and get into the how. How does this change every single Harry Potter book? Say the marriage happens quietly in the mid-1970s during the First Wizarding War, and a child is born sometime before Voldemort's fall in 1981. Bellatrix would be in her late 20s. Voldemort is at the height of his power. The child arrives, and almost immediately things get complicated. Because in 1981, Voldemort goes to Godric's Hollow, tries to kill baby Harry, and gets obliterated by his own rebounding curse. He's reduced to less than a ghost, a wraith hiding in Albanian forests. And Bellatrix, while other Death Eaters scramble for cover, she goes hunting. She and Rodolphus Lestrange and Rabaston and Barty Crouch Jr. capture Frank and Alice Longbottom, and end up at St. Mungo's Hospital for magical maladies and injuries. Permanently destroyed, trying to find out where Voldemort went. She gets caught. She gets sentenced to life in Azkaban. So, where is the child? This is the most critical question, and the answer most certainly points to one person, Narcissa Malfoy, Bellatrix's younger sister, married to Lucius with a son of her own, Draco, born in 1980. Narcissa is the only family member who would be both willing and positioned to raise Voldemort's heir in secret. The Malfoys escaped prosecution after the First War by claiming they were under the Imperius curse. They had wealth, they had a manor, and they had the ability to hide things. Imagine Draco Malfoy growing up alongside a secret cousin who is literally the child of Lord Voldemort. Hiding that child would take more than a big house. The wizarding world keeps records. Rumor has it Hogwarts holds a magical book that registers every magical child at birth, which is how acceptance letters find kids living in cupboards under stairs. A child of Voldemort appears in that book the moment they're born. Someone has to make sure the wrong people never read that entry. And the list of wizards capable of tampering with Hogwarts artifacts is short. Either the child's birth is disguised under the Lestrange name from day one, or Voldemort has a Death Eater inside the school doing quiet maintenance on the records. Both options are very on brand for him. Gringotts adds another wrinkle. The Lestrange Vault, the same one that later hides Helga Hufflepuff's cup, sits deep in maximum security territory, with a dragon parked outside. A hidden heir means hidden inheritance rights, and goblins take bloodlines seriously. Somewhere in the goblin ledgers, this child exists on paper, which is exactly the kind of loose end that eventually detonates a secret. Now we enter books 1 through 4, and this is where the tension simmers beneath the surface. During the Philosopher's Stone, Chamber of Secrets, and Prisoner of Azkaban, Voldemort is either possessing Quirrell, lurking as a memory in a diary, or completely absent. But somewhere in Malfoy Manor, or perhaps in a hidden Lestrange property, this child is growing up. They'd be roughly Harry's age, maybe a year or two older. Are they at Hogwarts? If so, they're almost certainly in Slytherin. They might be hidden under the Lestrange name, or the Black name, or something else entirely. But they exist, and they know what they are. Which raises the Dumbledore problem. This is the man who personally visited 11-year-old Tom Riddle at his orphanage and clocked him as trouble with one conversation. Dumbledore spent decades collecting memories about the Riddle family, and everyone connected to it. A mystery child with a Lestrange name showing up at the sorting ceremony would set off every alarm he has. He wouldn't confront the child. He'd do what he always does, watch and quietly position his pieces. Snape's job description suddenly includes babysitting duty, keep an eye on the possible spawn of the Dark Lord, while also teaching them potions and pretending everything is normal. The man was underpaid in canon, and this version of the job deserves hazard pay. The sorting itself is its own drama. The hat looked straight into Harry's head and offered him Slytherin, partly because of the soul fragment he carried. Put an actual Riddle heir under that brim, and the conversation gets uncomfortable fast. Slytherin is the obvious call, but the hat has met one riddle already, and it remembers. Goblet of Fire is where things shift dramatically. This is where Bellatrix first appears in canon, mentioned as a prisoner. When Voldemort returns to full power at the end of that book, standing in that graveyard with his Death Eaters, the existence of his child suddenly becomes relevant again. Does he summon the child? Does he even care? In character, Voldemort would view this child as either a useful tool or an irrelevant byproduct. There is no middle ground with him. There's a moment in that graveyard scene worth pausing on. As Voldemort walks the circle of Death Eaters, he stops at a gap and speaks of the loyal ones buried in Azkaban, the Lestranges, promising they will be honored beyond their dreams. In canon, that's the highest compliment he pays anyone that night, while the people actually standing there get insults. Make Bellatrix his wife, and that gap in the circle stops being sentimental staff appreciation. It's a king publicly mourning his captive queen in front of the court, and every Death Eater present hears the subtext. The hierarchy has a second seat at the top, and Lucius Malfoy is nowhere near it. Book 5, Order of the Phoenix, Bellatrix escapes Azkaban in the mass breakout of 1996. She's been in prison for 15 years. 15 years away from Voldemort, and 15 years away from her child. In canon, Bellatrix walks out of Azkaban and immediately goes back to being Voldemort's most fanatical servant. But add a child to this equation and something cracks open in the story. Does she even ask about the child first? Or does she report to Voldemort? Knowing Bellatrix, of course she reports to Voldemort. The child comes second, maybe third. Oh, who are we kidding? It comes fourth. Because in Bellatrix's hierarchy, the Dark Lord is everything. The Order of the Phoenix side of this is worth a detour. Grimmauld Place has the Black family tapestry, the one where Sirius shows Harry his own burned-off name. A marriage between Bellatrix and Voldemort goes on that tapestry, and a child goes on it too, stitched in gold thread right next to Draco, which means the Order's headquarters contains documentary evidence of Voldemort's heir, hanging on a wall Sirius walks past every day. Sirius spent 12 years in Azkaban, and came out with his sense of humor mostly intact. But learning that his deranged cousin produced an actual riddle would test even him. Kreacher, meanwhile, would treat the news as the greatest day of his life, and probably start polishing something in celebration. This is the same book where she murders Sirius Black, her own cousin, without hesitation. She cackles while doing it. Having a child of her own doesn't change this. If anything, it might make her more dangerous, because now she's fighting for a bloodline on top of a cause. Book 6, Half-Blood Prince. This is where Bellatrix's suspicion of Snape becomes incredibly important. In canon, she didn't trust him. She told Voldemort she thought he was wrong to trust Snape, but she was just a lieutenant. Now imagine she's his wife. Her suspicions carry real political weight. If Voldemort's wife is publicly questioning Snape's loyalty, the other Death Eaters notice. Snape's position becomes 10 times more precarious. Dumbledore's entire endgame, which relies on Snape being trusted, is suddenly balancing on a knife's edge. Look at Spinner's End seen through this lens. In canon, Bellatrix and Narcissa visit Snape's house, and Bellatrix spends the first half of the conversation interrogating him about his loyalty, while Narcissa begs for help. Snape answers every question calmly and then seals the unbreakable vow. Replay that scene with Bellatrix as the Dark Lord's wife and the power balance flips. She's no longer an overzealous colleague he can talk circles around. She's royalty, and her report of that evening goes directly into Voldemort's ear over breakfast. Every clever answer Snape gives now has to survive pillow pillow talk with the most paranoid wizard alive. The double agent routine was already the most dangerous job in Britain. This version of it comes with a hostile queen doing performance reviews. Bellatrix once said she'd sacrifice any sons in service to Voldemort. With a real child, that statement transforms from abstract fantasism into something genuinely horrifying. Would she train them in the dark arts in the way Voldemort trained her? Would the child be dragged into Death Eater operations? Or would Voldemort keep them hidden, a secret weapon, a contingency he'd never admit to needing? Book 7, Deathly Hallows. This is where everything detonates. The Malfoy Manor scenes. In canon, Voldemort has essentially taken over Malfoy Manor as his headquarters. Bellatrix is there. The Malfoys are there, living in terror. Now add Voldemort's own child to that household, the dynamics shift enormously. Bellatrix, who in canon tortures Hermione in the drawing room floor, is doing so in a house where her child might be upstairs. Dobby's rescue mission, which ends with the house elf being killed by Bellatrix's thrown knife, takes on a different weight when you realize she's defending not just her master's interests, but her family's stronghold. And then we reach the Battle of Hogwarts, May 2nd, 1998, the moment that changes everything. Bellatrix is dueling multiple opponents. She's laughing, she's gloating, she's throwing killing curses with abandon. And then Molly Weasley steps in. "Not my daughter, you know what she said." For one frozen instant, Bellatrix realizes exactly what has happened, and then she topples. Good riddance. In canon, Voldemort screams. His fury explodes like a bomb, blasting McGonagall, Kingsley, and Slughorn backward. He immediately tries to kill Molly. That's the only death in the whole series that Voldemort attempts to avenge, an honor neither Nagini nor any other Death Eater ever received. Fans have analyzed this moment endlessly. He reacted 3 times more intensely to Bellatrix's death than to Nagini's, and Nagini contained a piece of his soul. Now make Bellatrix his wife. His actual formal wife. That scream becomes something else entirely. Forget blasting 3 people backward. That explosion of magic would level part of the hall. And this time, the curse he aims at Molly Weasley lands. She falls within steps of the woman she just defeated in front of her own children. Voldemort in that moment would become more dangerous than he'd ever been, because for maybe the first time in his life, something has been taken from him that he cannot get back. Something closer than a Horcrux or a servant, and he might not even have the emotional vocabulary to process it. Rowling has said she always knew Molly would be the one to kill Bellatrix, because she wanted to display the force of maternal love, the mother who loves her children defeating the woman who would sacrifice hers. In this scenario, that contrast becomes almost unbearably sharp. Molly fights because she loves her daughter. Bellatrix fights because she loves power. In this timeline, both mothers die on that floor within moments of each other. And the child of Voldemort, somewhere in that castle or hidden far away, just lost a mother who would have given them up in a heartbeat for their father's cause. The post-war implications are enormous. Voldemort is dead. Bellatrix is dead. So is Molly Weasley. And the Weasleys enter the aftermath burying a mother alongside Fred. But Voldemort's child survives. A child who speaks Parseltongue inherited from the Slytherin bloodline. The bloodline of Salazar Slytherin himself through Tom Riddle, a child of 2 extraordinarily powerful dark wizards. Salazar Slytherin's last known heir. The wizarding world would be terrified. The Ministry would hunt this child. Former Death Eaters might rally around them. The child becomes a symbol, whether they want to be or not. The wizarding world has a track record with children of infamous parents, and it's mixed at best. Teddy Lupin, son of a werewolf, grows up loved and accepted. Barty Crouch Jr. went the other way, the respected official's son who turned out rotten, which proves parentage and destiny are messy things in this universe. But none of those cases involve the literal bloodline of Salazar Slytherin. The Ministry that emerges after the war, the one Kingsley Shacklebolt rebuilds, would face an ugly question with no clean answer. Does a 1-year-old or a teenager get punished for a crime that consists of existing? Hermione Granger, building a legal career in this timeline, suddenly has her first landmark case waiting for her. And the former Death Eaters are the other half of the problem. The ones who avoid Azkaban, the ones who slipped back into society the way Lucius Malfoy did, now have a living banner to gather behind. Voldemort himself spent years as a whisper and a rumor before returning. His child wouldn't even need to do anything. The name alone keeps the movement warm. And this is where the fanfiction community has absolutely thrived. The Bellamort pairing is one of the most popular Bellatrix ships in the entire franchise. On Archive of Our Own and fanfiction.net, writers have been exploring these exact dynamics for years. Stories like You Taught Me Language explore their relationship from Bellatrix's perspective as a teenager being trained by Voldemort. The Songs of Bellamort series goes fully into the alternate universe where Voldemort gets rid of Rodolphus, marries Bellatrix, and discovers that being a family man / aspiring dictator is more complicated than anticipated. Who knew? Jealousy, possessiveness, greed, lust, and a thirst for power all colliding. Desiccated and drowning strips Voldemort of his magic and traps him with Bellatrix, forcing him into vulnerability. These stories work because they take the canon dynamic, the fanatical devotion on one side and the cold calculation on the other, and push it to its logical extreme. The Wattpad and Quotev communities have gone even further, writing stories about daughters named things like Brianna, Riddle, or twin girls separated at birth. Some ask whether a child of Voldemort could bring peace and a nose. Others explore whether they'd make things 10 times worse. The answer, based on everything we know about Voldemort's nature and Bellatrix parenting instincts, is almost certainly worse. Now here's what makes this hypothetical so compelling. Far beyond adding a subplot, it puts the central thesis of Harry Potter on trial. The entire series argues that love is the most powerful force in magic. Harry survives because his mother loved him. Voldemort fails because he cannot love, because Merope Gaunt's love potion robbed him of that capacity before he even drew his first breath. But if Voldemort has a wife and a child, even in the most transactional, loveless way possible, it introduces a shadow version of the family structure that saved Harry. A dark mirror, a family held together by power and obsession instead of love. And in the end, the family destroys itself, because that's what happens when love is absent. Voldemort can't protect what he refuses to value. Bellatrix would sacrifice her own child, and the child raised in darkness inherits nothing but a name that the entire wizarding world wants to forget. That's the real tragedy of this hypothetical. If it did happen, it would prove Dumbledore right all over again. The love room in the Department of Mysteries. That locked chamber containing a force more powerful and more terrible than death. Voldemort never had it and never would have. And not even the darkest magic in his arsenal could change that. So, if one loveless marriage can rewrite 7 books, imagine the damage the chosen one could do with a wedding ring. What if Harry Potter married every other witch? That's your next lesson here at Stickman Hogwarts. Click now before Molly picks your date for you.